If your entire family cast you out just because you were pregnant, and 6 years later, you returned in the middle of your sister's wedding to expose the truth in front of hundreds of guests, what would you do? I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just held my son's hand and stepped forward and said one sentence that silenced the entire room. Do you think what I did was too cruel? If you were me, would you dare to show up uninvited on their perfect day? Leave a comment, because maybe you too have stood at the edge between forgiveness and truth. Stay until the end, because this story isn't just about revenge, it's about rebirth. And what I uncovered changed my life forever. I'm Camilla Reed, and if you're hearing my story today, remember this. No one is born strong. Strength is something you claw back, piece by piece, after being thrown to the bottom by the people you trusted most. I was once a promising medical student, the daughter of a respected Southern family. Then came that rainy night, pregnant, alone, disowned, with no home and no future. 6 years later, I came back. Not for revenge, but to tell the truth. And my son, he's the reason I'm not afraid anymore. The taxi pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the Reed family estate on the outskirts of Savannah. I smoothed the lapels of my white suit, suddenly conscious of the small coffee stain near the pocket. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You sure this is the place, ma'am?" I nodded, unable to find my voice as I stared at the Georgian-style mansion through the windshield. 6 years. 6 years since I'd seen that curved driveway lined with magnolia trees my grandmother had planted decades ago. "Mom, are we here?" Micah's small voice brought me back. My 6-year-old son looked up at me with those eyes, Ryan's eyes, wide and curious. "Yes, sweetie. This is where Mommy grew up." I paid the driver and helped Micah out of the car, his tiny hand clutching mine with complete trust. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the invitation in my purse, an invitation that wasn't meant for me. "The honor of your presence is requested at the marriage of Brianna Reed to Ryan Caldwell." I'd found it accidentally while searching online for my mother's address to send her a birthday card she would never open. My sister was marrying the father of my child, the man who had drugged me at a lab party 6 years ago, the man who had stolen my research, the man whose family had enough money and connections to make a pregnant, disgraced medical student disappear. The memory of that rainy April evening crashed over me like a wave. My mother's voice, cold as ice. No daughter of mine would be so careless, so common. I had begged her to believe me. "Mom, please. Something was in my drink. I would never." "Enough!" Her hand had struck my cheek with surprising force. "I raised you better than to spread vicious lies about Ryan Caldwell. Do you know what his father could do to our family? To our reputation?" Brianna had stood in the doorway of my bedroom, arms crossed, watching as I frantically packed whatever I could fit into one suitcase. "You should have known better than to throw yourself at him," she'd whispered. "He was always meant for me. Now look what you've done." When I'd struggled down the stairs with my bag, my mother was waiting by the front door. Without a word, she had opened it, revealing the downpour outside. When I hesitated, she'd grabbed the suitcase from my hand and tossed it onto the wet driveway. My books, my research notes, my future, scattered and soaking in the rain. "Mom, please, I'm pregnant." Her face had hardened even more. "Then that's all the more reason for you to leave. I won't have the neighbors talking." That was the last time I'd stood on these grounds. Until today, the day of my sister's wedding to the man who had destroyed my life and never even knew he had a son. Micah tugged at my hand. "Mom, why are you crying?" I hadn't realized there were tears running down my face. I knelt down to his level, looking into those familiar eyes. "Sometimes, sweetheart, Grown-ups cry when they come home after a long time away. Is this our home now? I shook my head. No, but today we're going to meet some people who should have been your family. I straightened, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the house where string quartets and champagne laughter filtered through the open windows. Today wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. And I had carried it silently for far too long. The first 3 months after being disowned were a blur of hunger and fear. My old Honda Civic became my home, parked in different Walmart parking lots around Jacksonville. I'd curl up in the back seat, one hand protectively over my growing belly, telling my unborn child stories about a future I couldn't see. We'll have a real home someday, I'd whisper, with bookshelves and a garden. You'll see. I found work washing dishes at a small diner that didn't ask too many questions about the pregnant girl with the haunted eyes. The manager, Lucia, would sometimes slip me leftover pie or meatloaf when no one was looking. "You're too skinny, girl," she'd say. "Baby needs more than just pride to grow." By my 6th month, the Honda's back seat had become too cramped for my swollen body. I'd sit up most nights, watching cars go by, wondering if my mother ever thought about what had become of me. If Brianna ever felt a moment's guilt. If Ryan even knew. That was the morning I fainted outside the gas station convenience store. I'd been counting quarters to see if I had enough for a carton of milk when the world went sideways. When I came to, an older black woman with silver dreadlocks was fanning me with a magazine. "There you are, child. You gave me quite a scare." Her name was Gloria Monroe. She owned a used bookstore called Secondhand Stories 3 blocks away. When she tried to help me up, I cried from embarrassment and exhaustion. "I can't pay you back," I said when she insisted on buying me breakfast. Gloria looked at me over her coffee cup, eyes sharp and knowing. "Not everything in this world is a transaction, honey." I didn't mean to tell her everything, but once I started talking, the words poured out like water through a broken dam. About medical school, about Ryan, about my family throwing me away like garbage, about living in my car with a baby due in 3 months and $17 to my name. When I finished, Gloria simply reached across the table and took my hand. "My spare room isn't much, but it has a real bed and a window that catches the morning sun." I shook my head. "I can't." "You can, and you will." I buried my own daughter 10 years ago. Cancer. She was 32. Gloria's eyes glistened. If someone had helped her when she needed it, maybe, well, some things we don't get second chances on. 2 days later, I moved into Gloria's spare room above the bookstore. She drove me to a community clinic where a kind doctor assured me that despite everything, my baby was healthy and strong. "A fighter," the doctor said, "just like his mama." Micah James Reed was born on a Tuesday morning in October. 7 pounds, 4 ounces of perfection. When they placed him on my chest, his eyes, so like his father's, stared up at me with a focus that seemed impossible for a newborn. "Hello, little man," I whispered. "It's just you and me against the world." I hadn't planned to stay with Gloria beyond a few weeks, but those weeks became months. I worked in the bookstore during the day, with Micah sleeping in a bassinet behind the counter. At night, after he was asleep, I'd read medical journals and pharmacy textbooks, refusing to let go of the dream that had been ripped away from me. "Knowledge is the one thing they can't take from you," Gloria would say, bringing me cups of tea as I studied. By Micah's first birthday, I had enrolled in online courses for pharmaceutical research. By his second, I was working remotely as a research assistant for a small lab specializing in molecular biology. The pay was meager, but it was work in my field, a foothold back into the world I'd been cast out of. No one from my family called. No birthday cards for Micah. No acknowledgement that we existed at all. Sometimes I'd dream that my mother came to the door, begging for forgiveness, wanting to know her grandson. I'd wake up with tears on my pillow, a hollow ache in my chest where family should have been. But we weren't alone. Gloria became Grandma Glow to Micah. The bookstore regulars brought him small gifts and took turns reading him stories. We had built a family from strangers who had chosen to care. "Mom, why don't I have a daddy?" Micah asked me one evening as I tucked him into bed in our tiny apartment above the bookstore. We had moved upstairs when Gloria's arthritis made the stairs too difficult. "You have a daddy," I said carefully. "He just doesn't know about you yet." "Will I ever meet him?" I stroked his dark hair, so like Ryan's. "Maybe someday, when the time is right." I didn't tell him that every night I searched online for news about Ryan Caldwell and Caldwell Biotech, that I'd been tracking the company's suspicious rise in the pharmaceutical world, that the cancer drug they were about to launch bore an uncomfortable resemblance to the research I'd been conducting before I was forced to leave. Some wounds time heals. Others just wait for the right moment to be reopened. It was an ordinary Tuesday when everything changed. Micah was 4, playing with blocks on the bookstore floor while I logged inventory on the ancient desktop computer. A regular customer had left behind a copy of Pharmaceutical Business Weekly, and the headline on the cover made my blood run cold. Caldwell Biotech poised for breakthrough. CEO Ryan Caldwell and Chief Scientist Brianna Reed to unveil revolutionary cancer treatment. There they were, smiling from the glossy cover. Ryan in an expensive suit, his arm around my sister, who was identified as Dr. Brianna Reed, lead researcher and Caldwell's fiancée. They stood in front of a state-of-the-art lab that should have been my workplace. My hands shook as I read the article describing their groundbreaking approach to targeting early-stage lymphoma cells, an approach that had been in my research notebooks the night my mother threw them into the rain. "You okay, Cam?" Gloria asked, noticing my expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Several," I replied, unable to tear my eyes from the article. That night, after putting Micah to bed, I used the bookstore's computer to dig deeper. The rabbit hole went further than I could have imagined. Through medical databases and research papers, I traced the development of what Caldwell Biotech was calling Calrevia, a drug whose molecular structure was suspiciously similar to one I'd been developing before my life imploded. But it was the business filings that revealed the ugliest truth. 3 months after I'd been thrown out, Brianna had been hired at Caldwell Biotech as a special consultant. 6 months after that, she'd been promoted to lead researcher. The timeline aligned perfectly with the development of Calrevia. They had stolen my work, my life's passion. While I'd been sleeping in my car and scrounging for food, they had been profiting from my research. I was still sitting at the computer when Gloria found me at 2 a.m., staring at an old photograph from a charity gala. In it, my mother stood beaming beside Ryan's father, accepting a large check for her children's arts foundation. "Did you know," I said without looking up, "that the going rate for a daughter is apparently $100,000? That's what the Caldwell Foundation donated to my mother's pet project 3 weeks after I was thrown out." Gloria's hand came to rest on my shoulder. "What are you going to do?" I closed the browser window and stood up. "First, I'm going to finish my degree. Then I'm going to rebuild my research from scratch. And when the time is right, I'm going to take back what's mine." It took 2 more years of silent, methodical work. With Gloria's connections, I secured a small business loan and founded Sunrise Molecular, a tiny research lab focused on developing alternatives to mainstream cancer treatments. Our operation was modest. Just me, 2 passionate recent graduates, and a retired oncologist who believed in our approach. We worked nights and weekends, comparing notes, running tests, refining the formula that had once existed only in my rain-soaked notebooks. I was determined not to just recreate my old work, but to improve it, make it safer, more effective, more accessible to patients who couldn't afford the premium Caldwell Biotech would surely charge. When our preliminary results showed promise, I reached out to Dr. Harriet Chen, an FDA consultant I'd met during my medical school days. She remembered me, the brilliant student who had mysteriously dropped out, and agreed to review our data confidentially. "This is remarkable work, Camilla," she said after examining our research. "But you should know, Caldwell's drug has serious side effects they're downplaying in their FDA submissions. I can't officially tell you this, but their trial data has irregularities." I wasn't surprised. Ryan had always been willing to cut corners, and Brianna had always been willing to look the other way if it benefited her. The final piece fell into place when an anonymous package arrived at the bookstore. Inside was a USB drive containing internal Caldwell Biotech emails. Emails proving that Ryan and Brianna had conspired to drug me at that party years ago, planning to discredit me just as our research team was about to make a breakthrough. "We need to make sure she's out of the picture before we move forward," Ryan had written. "Your mother's already on board. Says she'll handle the family side if we handle the academic dismissal." The email was dated 3 days before the night that changed everything. I sat on the floor of the bookstore's back room. The truth finally laid bare. My own mother had been complicit. My sister had orchestrated my downfall. And Ryan, the man whose eyes I saw every day in our son's face, had been the architect of it all. Gloria found me there, silent tears streaming down my face. "Now what?" she asked softly. I wiped my eyes and stood up. "Now we finish what we started." Our drug, Suncor, received FDA approval on Micah's 6th birthday. While Caldwell Biotech had been rushing their product to market, we had been methodical, transparent, focused on safety as much as efficacy. When reports of severe side effects began emerging from Cal Revia's early patients, Suncor was positioned as the safer alternative. Small hospitals in the Southeast began to take notice. Our pricing model, significantly more affordable than Caldwell's, meant that facilities serving lower-income communities could actually stock the medication. We weren't getting rich, but we were making a difference. I was reviewing our quarterly numbers when the email notification popped up, a digital wedding invitation that had found its way to my old university email address, which I still checked occasionally. Brianna Reed and Ryan Caldwell requested the honor of my presence at their wedding, to be held at the Reed family estate. The date sent a chill through me. April 22nd. Exactly 6 years to the day since I'd been thrown out of my childhood home. I stared at the screen for a long time before forwarding the invitation to myself with a simple note. "It's time." Gloria looked concerned when I told her my plan. "Are you sure, Camilla? These people hurt you badly. They don't deserve your forgiveness." "This isn't about forgiveness," I replied, watching Micah playing with his birthday presents. "It's about truth, and about a little boy who deserves to know where he comes from, even if his origins are ugly." I booked plane tickets to Savannah, bought Micah his first suit, and packed the evidence I'd accumulated over the years into a small leather portfolio. The final piece was a DNA test confirming what I'd always known, that Micah was undeniably Ryan's son. The night before we left, I sat Micah down and tried to explain where we were going in terms a 6-year-old could understand. "We're going to meet your grandmother and your aunt, and the man who is your father." His brow furrowed. "Will they like me?" The question broke my heart. Anyone who knows you loves you, Micah. If they don't, that's their loss, not yours. Gloria drove us to the airport, hugging me fiercely before we went through security. "Remember who you are now," she whispered. "Not who they tried to make you." The flight to Savannah was bumpy with spring thunderstorms. As we descended through clouds, Micah pressed his face against the window. "Is that where you're from, Mom? It's so green." "Yes, I said, watching the familiar landscape emerge below us. That's where I'm from, but it's not home anymore. Home was a small apartment above a bookstore in Jacksonville. Home was Gloria's Sunday dinners and Micah's laughter. Home was the life we'd built from nothing. But first, I had a wedding to attend. Wedding guests in pastel finery milled about the sprawling lawn of the Reed estate. White chairs arranged in perfect rows faced an elaborate floral arch. String quartet music drifted through the warm spring air. I stood at the periphery, holding Micah's hand, watching the Southern aristocracy that had once been my world. I recognized faces, my mother's bridge club friends, my father's golf partners, former classmates who had pretended not to see me when I'd needed help the most. "You look beautiful," Micah said, looking up at me with solemn eyes. I smoothed my white suit, chosen deliberately, not to mock the bride, but to declare my own rebirth. "Thank you, sweetheart. So do you." A bell chimed, signaling guests to take their seats. I waited until everyone was settled, until the music changed and the procession began. Bridesmaids in lavender floated down the aisle. Then came Ryan, handsome in his tuxedo, standing confidently at the altar. And finally, Brianna on our father's arm, radiant in ivory lace, smiling as if she deserved every bit of this perfect day. I took a deep breath and stepped forward from the shadows, Micah's hand firmly in mine. We walked not down the aisle, but along its edge, moving quietly until we stood at the front row where my mother sat. The officiant's voice faltered mid-sentence. Heads turned. A gasp rippled through the assembled guests. My mother's face went ash white. The champagne flute she held slipped from her fingers, shattering on the stone patio. "Camilla?" she whispered, as if seeing a ghost. Brianna, registering the disturbance, turned from her place at the altar. Her expression morphed from confusion to horror as she recognized me. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, clutching her bouquet so tightly that petals fell to the ground. Ryan hadn't noticed yet, focused on his bride, until she jerked away from him. When he turned and saw me, recognition dawned slowly. Then his eyes dropped to Micah. The resemblance was undeniable. "I came to congratulate the happy couple," I said, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. "And to return something that was taken from me." The officiant, clearly confused, tried to regain control. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess." "No need," I interrupted, turning to address the stunned guests. "I won't take much of your time. I just thought everyone should meet my son, Micah." "Ryan's son." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. My mother gripped the chair in front of her for support. "You're lying," Brianna said, but her voice quavered with uncertainty. Ryan stepped forward, his face drained of color. "Camilla, this isn't the place." "When exactly is the place, Ryan? When would have been convenient for you to acknowledge drugging me at that lab party? Or stealing my research? Or abandoning your own child?" Micah looked up at me, confused but trusting. I squeezed his hand reassuringly. "I was never going to come back here," I continued. "But then I saw this." I pulled out my phone and showed the screen. The invitation with its cruelly significant date. April 22nd. The same day you all threw me away 6 years ago. Was that intentional, Brianna? A little victory lap? My sister's perfect makeup couldn't hide her guilt. She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "You have no proof of anything," my mother finally said, finding her voice. "You show up after all these years with wild accusations and—" "Oh, I have proof," I replied, opening my portfolio. "Emails, recordings, bank transfers, the works." At that moment, Ryan's father stood up from his front row seat. "That's enough. Security will escort you out." "Before they do," I said, "everyone should know that the FDA is launching a full investigation into Calrevia. The side effects you've been hiding, the falsified trial data, it's all coming out. I've made sure of it." As if on cue, several men and women in dark suits appeared at the back of the gathering. One held up a badge. "FDA Enforcement Division. We have a warrant to seize certain records from Caldwell Biotech offices." The perfect wedding dissolved into chaos. Guests began to leave in embarrassed clusters. My mother sat down heavily, looking suddenly old and defeated. Ryan approached cautiously, his eyes fixed on Micah. "Is he really?" "Yes," I said simply. "He's yours, though you've done nothing to deserve him." Micah, who had been silent until now, looked up at the man who was biologically his father. "Are you my dad?" he asked, his voice small but clear. The question hung in the air, heavy with 6 years of absence and loss. The wedding guests had mostly dispersed, leaving the elegant setup abandoned like a film set after shooting wrapped. My mother, Brianna, Ryan, his parents, and a few core family members had moved into the house, my childhood home, where we now sat in tense silence in the formal living room. Micah sat beside me on the antique sofa, where I'd once done homework, coloring quietly in a book that Gloria had packed for him. The FDA agents had left with Ryan's father to retrieve documents from his office, promising to return. "You've ruined everything," Brianna finally said, mascara tracks staining her cheeks. "You couldn't just stay gone, could you?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her. The perfect Brianna Reed, who had always gotten everything she wanted. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished. "I didn't come to ruin your wedding," I said honestly. "I came because my son deserves to know his family, and because the truth deserves to be told." "What truth?" my mother interjected. "That you got yourself in trouble and tried to blame Ryan? That you've spent years nursing some vendetta instead of moving on with your life?" I removed a flash drive from my portfolio and placed it on the coffee table. "This contains email exchanges between Ryan and Brianna from 6 years ago, planning exactly how to get me out of the picture so they could take over my research. It also includes a record of the $100,000 donation the Caldwell Foundation made to your arts program 3 weeks after you threw me out." "Was that the price of your complicity, Mom?" My mother's face crumpled slightly before she regained her composure. "I did what was best for the family." "I was your family," I said quietly. "I was pregnant and alone and terrified, and you threw me away like trash." Ryan, who had been staring at Micah with a strange expression, finally spoke. "I'm sorry," he said. "I never knew about the baby, I swear." "Would it have made a difference?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. "I don't know. I was young and ambitious and stupid. And now?" I pressed. "Now that you know you have a son? Now that your company is about to be investigated for fraud? Now that your perfect life is crumbling? What kind of man are you now, Ryan?" Before he could answer, the front door opened. A woman's voice called out, "Janice, is everything all right? Most of the guests are leaving." My father's sister, Aunt Caroline, appeared in the doorway. She had always been kind to me, the artistic bohemian in a family of strict traditionalists. She froze when she saw me. "Camilla?" she whispered, then noticed Micah. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God!" Micah looked up from his coloring. "Hi," he said politely. Aunt Caroline crossed the room and knelt in front of him. "Hello there. What's your name?" "Micah James Reed. I'm 6. Are you my family too?" The simple question broke something in the room. Aunt Caroline's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm your great Aunt Caroline." She turned to me, her expression a mixture of joy and anguish. "We looked for you, Camilla. Your father and I. After he got back from his deployment and found out what happened, we hired private investigators, but it was like you'd vanished. I hadn't known my father had tried to find me. He had been stationed overseas when everything fell apart, and I'd assumed he had sided with my mother upon his return. "Where is Dad?" I asked, suddenly realizing his absence. "At the VA hospital in Charleston," Aunt Caroline replied. "He had a stroke last year. He's recovered some, but—" She trailed off, then added, "He talks about you all the time. He never gave up hope of finding you." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All these years, I'd thought I was completely alone. The idea that my father had been searching for me, that he'd never abandoned me in his heart. It was almost too much to bear. "I want to see him," I said, my voice thick with emotion. My mother made a dismissive noise. "After the spectacle you've just caused, I hardly think—" "Shut up, Janice," Aunt Caroline snapped with surprising force. "You've done enough damage." The tension in the room was broken by Micah tugging at Ryan's sleeve. "Do you want to see my drawing?" he asked, holding up his coloring book. "It's a dinosaur." Ryan looked startled, then deeply moved. He knelt beside Micah. "I'd love to see it." As they bent their heads together over the coloring book, two profiles so similar it was uncanny, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about healing wounds that had festered for too long. "What happens now?" Brianna asked quietly. "That depends," I replied, "on whether you're willing to acknowledge what you did, on whether any of you are capable of genuine remorse." My mother looked away, but Ryan met my gaze steadily. "I want to know my son," he said. "I want to make this right, however I can." "And Cal Revilla?" I asked. "The patients who are suffering because you rushed an unsafe drug to market?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll cooperate fully with the investigation. Pull the drug if necessary. Start over the right way." It wasn't enough, not nearly enough to make up for 6 years of suffering. But it was a start. Aunt Caroline put her arm around me. "Come home with me tonight. We'll go see your father tomorrow. He needs to meet his grandson." As we prepared to leave, my mother finally broke her rigid stance. "Will you ever forgive me?" she asked, her voice small. I looked at her, this woman who had prioritized appearances over her own daughter's welfare, and found that my hatred had dulled to something like pity. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But Micah deserves a grandmother who loves him. Whether that's you or not is up to you." The hospital room was bathed in soft morning light. My father sat in a wheelchair by the window, thinner than I remembered, his left side slightly drooping from the stroke. When Aunt Caroline let us in, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Cammy?" he whispered, using my childhood nickname. "Is it really you?" I knelt beside his wheelchair, tears flowing freely. "It's me, Dad. I'm home." His good hand stroked my hair with trembling fingers. "I looked everywhere for you, baby girl. Every day I looked." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry I was so hard to find." Then I turned and beckoned Micah forward. "Dad, I want you to meet someone very special. This is Micah, your grandson." My father's eyes filled with tears as Micah approached cautiously. "Hello, sir," he said, the manners Gloria had taught him shining through. "He has your smile," my father said to me, "and your mother's chin." "Actually," I said gently, "he looks just like his father." Understanding dawned on my father's face. "Caldwell's boy? The one your sister was seeing?" I nodded. "It's complicated, Dad, but yes." He reached for Micah's hand with his good one. "Well, grandson, it seems we have a lot of catching up to do." That visit became the first of many. My father transferred to a rehabilitation facility in Jacksonville so he could be closer to us. Aunt Caroline sold her Savannah house and bought a small bungalow 3 blocks from Sunrise Molecular, declaring that she was done with that town and those people. Ryan, true to his word, cooperated with the FDA investigation. Caldwell Biotech issued a voluntary recall of Calrevia and began a new round of clinical trials with stricter protocols. The scandal cost them millions, but in the end, it made them a better company. As for Brianna, she and Ryan never rescheduled their wedding. Last I heard, she had moved to Europe to find herself, funded by a trust fund that would ensure she never had to face real consequences for her actions. My mother was a slower work in progress. At first, she maintained that she had done what any mother would do to protect her family's reputation. But as months passed, and she saw what her choices had cost her, one daughter gone, her husband moved away, her standing in the community diminished by scandal, something began to shift. Her first visit was awkward and brief. She brought Micah an expensive toy he showed little interest in and could barely look me in the eye. But she came back a month later, and then again, each time staying a little longer, speaking a little more openly. "I was wrong," she finally admitted one afternoon as we sat on Gloria's back porch, watching Micah and my father plant sunflower seeds in the garden. "I was so wrong, Camilla. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I understand what I did. I didn't rush to absolve her. Some wounds are too deep for easy forgiveness. But I did offer her a second chance, not for my sake, but for Micah's." Ryan established a trust fund for Micah and visited regularly. At first, I was resistant, afraid he would try to take my son from me. But over time, I saw that he truly wanted to be a father, not just financially, but emotionally present. "I missed 6 years," he said once as we watched Micah at soccer practice. "I don't want to miss any more." Sunrise Molecular grew steadily, our responsible approach to drug development earning us respect in the industry. Gloria joined our board of directors, bringing her sharp business sense and unfailing moral compass to every decision. "Always told you that you'd change the world," she said with satisfaction when our second drug received FDA approval. "Just had to take the long way around." Charleston's waterfront glowed gold in the early morning light as Micah and I walked along the Battery, our weekend ritual whenever we visited my father. At 8 years old, Micah had grown tall for his age, with Ryan's athletic build but my quiet thoughtfulness. "Mom, are you mad at Dad for being at Grandma's house yesterday?" he asked, skipping alongside me. My parents had cautiously reconciled after my father's recovery, though they maintained separate residences, he in Charleston, she still in Savannah. The arrangement seemed to suit them both. "No, sweetheart. Your dad and your grandma both care about you. That's what matters." 2 years had changed so much. Sunrise Molecular now partnered with 50 hospitals across the Southeast, providing affordable cancer treatments to communities that had previously been priced out of cutting-edge care. Ryan had reformed Caldwell Biotech, bringing me on as a consultant to help them rebuild their reputation through ethical research practices. Brianna had returned from Europe subdued and humbled, seeking therapy to address the jealousy and insecurity that had driven her actions. Our relationship would never be close, but we had reached a fragile peace built on mutual acknowledgement of past wrongs. Gloria still ran her bookstore, though now with 2 part-time employees who did the heavy lifting. At 73, she had become the matriarch of our unusual family, hosting Sunday dinners where Ryan, my father, Aunt Caroline, and occasionally even my mother would gather around her table. "Look, Mom! A dolphin!" Micah pointed excitedly at a silvery fin breaking the harbor surface, As we watched the dolphin arc through the water, a familiar voice called my name. I turned to see Lucas Chen, Dr. Harriet Chen's son, and now Sunrise Molecular's legal counsel, jogging toward us. "Thought I'd find you two here," he said, slightly out of breath. "Dad's making his famous waffles and sent me to bring you back for breakfast." Lucas had entered our lives unexpectedly when his mother connected us for legal help with the FDA investigation. What had begun as professional consultation had slowly evolved into friendship, and recently, cautiously, something more. Micah high-fived him. "With blueberries? Would they be famous Chen waffles without blueberries?" Lucas teased, ruffling Micah's hair. As the three of us walked back toward the Chen's home, I reflected on the winding path that had led me here. From the desperate girl sleeping in her car to the woman I'd become, still healing, still learning, but finally standing in my truth. Lucas fell into step beside me, his hand occasionally brushing mine. "Penny for your thoughts?" "Just thinking about how life can surprise you," I said. 2 years ago, I couldn't imagine any of this." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Lucas knew my story, all of it, the ugly parts and the beautiful ones. He'd been there through the legal battles, the reconciliations, the difficult days when resentment threatened to pull me under. "You know what my mom always says," he replied. "Healing isn't linear." A reporter from the Charleston Post and Courier was waiting on the Chen's porch when we arrived. She'd been persistent in her requests for an interview since Sunrise Molecular had been featured in a national medical journal. "Dr. Reed," she called, rising from her seat. "Just 5 minutes of your time? Your company's approach to affordable cancer treatments is changing the industry standard. Readers want to know, after everything that happened with Caldwell Biotech, how do you not harbor more resentment? Why partner with them now?" I glanced at Micah, who had already raced inside toward the promise of waffles. "Resentment is a heavy thing to carry," I said after a moment. "It served its purpose for a while, kept me moving forward when I had nothing else. But at some point, you have to set it down or it becomes the thing that defines you." "So you've forgiven them? The Caldwells? Your family?" she pressed. Forgiveness. Such a simple word for such a complex process. I thought of my mother, slowly earning back the right to be in our lives. Of Ryan, learning how to be a father to the son he'd never known existed. Of Brianna, still finding her way back from the person she'd allowed herself to become. "Forgiveness isn't really for them," I said finally. "It's for me. For my son. He deserves to grow up seeing that healing is possible, that people can change, that love is stronger than bitterness." "And what about your company's success? Some might call it the ultimate revenge." I smiled, thinking of Gloria's words to me years ago in that diner when I had nothing. "Not everything in this world is a transaction, honey." "Success isn't revenge," I replied. "It's just evidence that sometimes the long path is the right one." The reporter jotted this down, then asked, "Any regrets about showing up at that wedding? About exposing everything so publicly?" The question gave me pause. I'd replayed that day in my mind countless times, the shock on my mother's face, Brianna's crumbling composure, Ryan seeing his son for the first time. It had been dramatic, perhaps even cruel in its timing. But after years of silence, of being erased, I had needed to be heard. "I regret that it had to happen that way," I answered honestly. "But I don't regret breaking the silence. Some truths need to be spoken out loud to be healed." Inside the Chen house, laughter spilled from the kitchen. Micah's voice, my father's deeper tones, Lucas's mother asking about more orange juice, a family cobbled together from broken pieces and new connections. I excused myself from the reporter and stepped inside, where Micah was helping Dr. Chen flip waffles, his small face serious with concentration. My father sat at the table, carefully cutting fruit with his good hand, while Lucas set out plates and silverware. "Mom, Grandpa's telling the dolphin story again," Micah called when he saw me, rolling his eyes but smiling. My father winked at me. "Boy needs to learn his family history." Family. Such a simple word for something so complicated, so painful, so necessary. Later that afternoon, as we drove back to Jacksonville, Micah fell asleep in the back seat. Lucas, who had offered to drive us home, glanced at me. "Everything okay? You've been quiet." I watched the coastline slip by, the ocean catching golden light as the day began to fade. "I used to think healing meant going back to who I was before," I said softly. "Before Ryan, before being disowned, before everything fell apart. I wanted to reclaim the old Camilla, the promising medical student with the perfect family and the brilliant future." Lucas nodded, waiting for me to continue. "But that's not how it works, is it? You don't go back. You just become something new. Someone who carries all of it, the pain and the joy, the loss and the finding." He reached across the console and took my hand. "And who are you becoming, Camilla Reed?" I looked back at my sleeping son, this miracle who had saved me as much as I had saved him. At the research notes in my bag that would help thousands of cancer patients. At the man beside me, patient and kind and unexpected. "I'm still figuring that out," I said. "But I think I'm becoming someone who knows that sunrise always follows even the darkest night." As we crossed the Florida state line, I thought about Gloria waiting for us at home, probably with dinner already made and questions about our trip, about the small apartment above the bookstore that had become our sanctuary, about the life we'd built from nothing but determination and the kindness of strangers who became family. Some people spend their whole lives trying to find their place in the world. I had lost mine, then created a new one, stronger and more authentic than before. It wasn't perfect. There were still difficult conversations ahead, boundaries to maintain, trust to rebuild. But it was real, and it was mine. Micah stirred in the back seat, blinking sleepily. "Are we home yet, Mom?" I smiled at my son, this child who had never been a mistake, but always a miracle. "Almost, sweetheart. Almost home." And for the first time in a very long time, those words felt completely true.